In the untamed territories of 1880s New Mexico, legends are born in blood and gunsmoke. But some legends remain hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. This is the story of Sarah Blackwood, a woman who carries more than just her infant son. She bears the legacy of the most feared gunslinger the West has ever known. When a group of ruthless thugs mistake her quiet demeanor for weakness, they're about to learn that the deadliest predator is the one you never see. Coming? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dusty streets of Silver Creek shimmer under the scorching afternoon sun as Sarah Blackwood makes her way through the bustling marketplace. Her cream-colored dress, though simple, carries an unmistakable air of elegance, and her dark hair is neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. In her arms, she cradles her 3-month-old son James while skillfully navigating through the crowd with a basket of supplies balanced in her other hand. The town has been her refuge for the past 2 months, a place where nobody knows her true identity. Here, she's just another widow trying to make a fresh start, or so they think. The townsfolk regard her with a mixture of pity and curiosity, whispering amongst themselves about the young mother who arrived on the late-night stage with nothing but a baby and a few possessions. What they don't know is that beneath her modest attire, a custom-made holster sits snugly against her thigh, housing a meticulously maintained Colt Navy revolver, a wedding gift from her late husband, Thomas. Lightning Blackwood, the same gun that has taken more lives than she cares to remember. As Sarah approaches Martinez's general store, she notices a group of rough-looking men lounging outside the saloon across the street. They're not local cowboys or miners. Their clothes are too fine, their guns too well maintained. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar running down his left cheek, catches her eye and tips his hat with a predatory smile. Inside the store, old Mr. Martinez greets her warmly. "Senora Blackwood, how is little James today?" The elderly shopkeeper has been kind to her since her arrival, often slipping extra candies into her purchases for free. "He's growing stronger every day, Mr. Martinez," Sarah responds softly, her voice carrying a hint of refined Eastern education that sets her apart from most frontier women. As she browses the shelves, she can't help but notice the nervous tension in the shopkeeper's movements. "Those men," Martinez whispers while wrapping her purchases, "they arrived 3 days ago. Bad men, senora. They work for Victor Kane." The name sends an involuntary chill down Sarah's spine. Kane, the railroad baron who's been buying up land across the territory, using any means necessary to expand his empire. Sarah's fingers instinctively brush against her thigh, feeling the reassuring presence of her hidden weapon. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Martinez." As she exits the store, the group of men has moved closer. Their leader blocks her path, flanked by 4 others who spread out in a loose semicircle. The few townspeople on the street suddenly find urgent business elsewhere, leaving the street, eerily empty. Well, the scarred man drawls. "What do we have here? A pretty little widow with a baby." His voice carries a mocking sympathy that makes Sarah's blood run cold. These are dangerous times for a woman alone. Might need some protection. Sarah shifts her son to her hip, her movements careful and measured. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I manage just fine on my own." Her words are polite, but there's steel beneath the silk of her voice. The man steps closer, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "Name's Jackson, ma'am. Head of security for Mr. Kane's interests in Silver Creek." He gestures at the buildings. Around them, lot of accidents happening lately. Fires, break-ins. Would be a shame if anything happened to you and the little one. Sarah's green eyes, normally soft and maternal, harden imperceptibly. She's seen his type before, thugs who mistake refinement for weakness, who prey on those they believe can't fight back. They don't realize that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses not to bare its fangs. "Mr. Jackson, she replies, her tone cooling several degrees. "I believe you're frightening my son." Indeed, little James has started to fuss, picking up on the tension in the air. One of Jackson's men, a weasel-faced individual with yellowed teeth, laughs harshly. "Better a scared baby than a dead one, lady. Mr. Kane's offering to buy every property on this street. Smart folks are selling, stubborn ones." He leaves the threat hanging. Sarah bounces James gently, soothing him while her mind calculates angles and distances. 5 men, all armed, 2 carrying their revolvers too high, on their hips, amateur's mistake. The one on the left favors his right leg slightly. Old injury, slow to draw. In her previous life, she'd have them all down before they cleared leather. But that was before. Before she promised Thomas she'd try to build a different life for their son. Before she buried her guns, along with her heart in that windswept cemetery outside Santa Fe. "I'll be sure to pass your message along to my landlord," she says finally, her voice steady. "Now, if you'll excuse me, my son needs his nap." Jackson's hand shoots out, gripping her arm just above the elbow. "Maybe you're not understanding me. Clearly, Mrs. Blackwood," she answers, knowing the name means nothing to them. Not here, not yet. Sarah Blackwood. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood, let me be plain. By sundown tomorrow, you either convince old Martinez to sell, or we start making examples. Wouldn't want that pretty face of yours getting scarred up like mine, would we?" The threat hangs in the air like gun smoke after a firefight. Sarah looks down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. For just a moment, her carefully maintained facade cracks, and Jackson catches a glimpse of something in her eyes that makes him step back involuntarily. Something cold and deadly, like staring down a rattler's gaze. "Take your hand off me, Mr. Jackson," she says quietly, "or I promise you'll draw back a stump." The sudden steel in her voice catches him off guard. He releases her arm, covering his momentary unease with a harsh laugh. "Feisty one, ain't you? We'll see how much fight you have left tomorrow." He steps aside with an exaggerated bow. "Good day, Mrs. Blackwood." Sarah walks away, her pace unhurried, her back straight. She can feel their eyes on her, hear their crude jokes and laughter. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind is racing. She'd chosen Silver Creek because it was quiet, off the main rail lines, a place where she could raise James in peace. Now it seems trouble has found her anyway. As she reaches her modest boarding house, Sarah allows herself a small, grim smile. These men think they're the wolves, come to threaten a defenseless sheep. They don't realize they've just threatened the widow of the man who once outgunned the entire Dawson gang at high noon in the streets of Dodge City. The woman who, before she ever took his name, was known in certain circles as Shadow Hand Sarah, the only person who could match Thomas. Blackwood shot for shot. Looking down at her sleeping son, Sarah makes a decision. She's tried to honor Thomas's last wish, to leave that life behind, but some things are worth fighting for. And if Victor Kane's men want to learn the hard way why the name Blackwood once struck terror into the hearts of outlaws across the frontier, she'll be happy to teach them. Tonight, after James is asleep, she'll dig up the wooden box buried under the floorboards, the one containing her twin Remingtons, custom-made with pearl handles and silver inlay. Tomorrow, Shadow Hand Sarah will remind these thugs that the most dangerous snake isn't the one that rattles, it's the one that strikes in silence. Later that evening, as Sarah rocks James to sleep in their modest boarding house room, her mind drifts back to the last conversation she had with Thomas. It was 3 months ago, on that fateful night in Santa Fe. The moon had been full, casting long shadows through their bedroom window as Thomas pressed his favorite Colt into her hands. "Promise me, Sarah," he had whispered, his voice weak from the poison that was slowly claiming his life. "Promise me you'll give our boy a chance at a different life." His once steady hands trembled as they covered hers. "But if trouble finds you..." A ghost of his old smile crossed his pain-lined face. Well, just remember what I taught you about playing possum. A soft knock at her door brings Sarah back to the present. It's Mrs. Peterson, her elderly neighbor, carrying a bowl of hot soup. The old woman has taken a grandmotherly interest in Sarah and James since their arrival. "Thought you might be hungry, dear," Mrs. Peterson whispers, noting the sleeping baby. As she sets down the soup, her weathered face creases with concern. "I saw what happened in town today. Those men, they've been causing trouble all over. Last week, the Cooper family's barn mysteriously caught fire after they refused to sell." Sarah accepts the soup with a grateful smile. "Don't worry about me, Mrs. Peterson. I've handled worse than Victor Kane's hired thugs." For a moment, her careful mask slips, and something in her tone makes the older woman pause. "You know," Mrs. Peterson says slowly, "you remind me of someone. Years ago, before I moved to Silver Creek, I lived in Dodge City. There was a woman there, never knew her real name, but they called her Shadow Hand. She could draw and fire faster than any man I'd ever seen." The old woman's eyes narrow thoughtfully. "She had the same way of moving that you do, like a cat pretending to be a mouse." Sarah's expression doesn't change, but her hand tightens slightly on the soup bowl. "Dodge City was a lifetime ago, Mrs. Peterson. Those days are best left in the past." The older woman nods sagely. "Perhaps, but sometimes the past has a way of becoming exactly what we need in the present." She pats Sarah's hand and heads for the door. "Whatever you decide to do, dear, know that not everyone in Silver Creek bends to Kane's will so easily. We're just waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to him." After Mrs. Peterson leaves, Sarah moves to the window, watching as the last rays of sunlight paint the street in shades of gold and crimson. Across the way, she spots two of Jackson's men lounging on the saloon's porch, clearly watching her boarding house. Their presence confirms what she already suspected. Tomorrow's deadline is just for show. They're waiting for nightfall. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah places James gently in his cradle and moves to the corner of the room. Carefully, prying up the loose floorboard, she removes the oiled cloth wrap that contains her past. The twin Remingtons gleam in the fading light, their pearl handles and silver inlay, unmarred by time. Behind them lies a worn leather gun belt, complete with twin holsters designed to sit at the small of her back. Thomas's last gift to her, custom-made to be invisible under a lady's dress. As she checks and loads the weapons with practiced efficiency, Sarah reflects on the irony of her situation. She came to Silver Creek seeking anonymity, a chance to raise her son away from the violence that had defined both her and Thomas's lives. Instead, she's about to remind these men why the name Shadow Hand Sarah once made hardened gunfighters choose different saloons. A soft coo from James's cradle brings a gentle smile to her face. Crossing the room, she leans down to kiss his forehead. "Your papa used to say that there are two kinds of strength in this world, little one," she whispers. "The strength everyone can see, and the strength you keep hidden until it's needed." Her fingers trace the delicate features of his face. "Tomorrow, these men are going to learn about the second kind." The sound of breaking glass and drunken laughter drifts up from the street below. Sarah's smile turns predatory as she begins disassembling her guns for cleaning. Let them laugh. Let them think they have all the power. Tomorrow, they'll learn what Thomas knew from the first moment he met her, that sometimes the deadliest force on the frontier isn't the man with the fastest draw, but the woman who knows how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The pre-dawn. Light creeps over Silver Creek like a grey shroud, bringing with it the heavy scent of approaching rain. Sarah stands at her window, watching as two of Jackson's men stumble out of the saloon, their night of drinking evident in their unsteady gait. She's been awake for hours, methodically preparing for what's to come. Her cream-colored dress has been replaced by a darker, more practical garment, navy blue cotton that won't show bloodstains. The gun belt sits snugly at the small of her back, concealed by a fashionable bustle that Thomas had specially modified for her years ago. To any observer, she looks like a modest widow going about her morning routine. Only the cold calculation in her eyes betrays anything different. James stirs in his cradle, and Sarah moves to feed him, her movements gentle and unhurried. "Your father always said breakfast was the most important meal of the day," she whispers, smiling at the memory. Of course, he usually said it while cleaning his guns at the kitchen table. A knock at her door breaks the peaceful moment. It's Mrs. Peterson, her face drawn with worry. "Sarah, dear, you should know. More of Kane's men arrived on the early morning stage. At least 6 of them." The older woman wrings her hands. "They're gathering at the saloon now." Sarah nods, unsurprised. "Would you watch James for a few hours? I need to take care of some business in town." Mrs. Peterson's eyes drift to the slight bulge at Sarah's back, visible only because she knows to look for it. "Of course, dear. And be careful. Kane's men, they killed my husband in Dodge City years ago. Said it was a fair fight, but Matthew never even cleared his holster." "I remember that day," Sarah says softly, surprising the older woman. "Matthew Peterson, he was a good man, taught school to the local children." She checks her reflection in the mirror, adjusting her bonnet. "The man who shot him was Curtis Quick Draw McGraw. He died 2 weeks later in a dark alley. They never did find out who did it." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened with recognition. "It was you. You were the one who—" She trails off as Sarah places James in her arms. The past has a way of rhyming. Mrs. Peterson, today history might just repeat itself. Sarah kisses her son's forehead. "If anything happens to me, there's a letter in my dresser drawer. It needs to reach a man named Gabriel Hawthorne in Santa Fe. He'll make sure James is taken care of." Outside, the streets are beginning to fill with the usual morning traffic, but there's an undercurrent of tension in the air. Word of Kane's ultimatum has spread, and people hurry about their business, avoiding eye contact. As Sarah makes her way toward Martinez's store, she catalogues the changes from yesterday. 3 new faces lounging on the hotel porch, hired guns by their stance. 2 more outside the telegraph office. All of them were watching her. Martinez is already opening his store when she arrives. The old man's hands shake slightly as he works the lock. "Senora Blackwood, you shouldn't be here. Kane's men, they were asking questions about you last night, about where you came from." "Let them ask, Mr. Martinez." Sarah helps him with the heavy door. "Tell me, do you know why they're so interested in your store specifically?" The shopkeeper hesitates, then leads her inside. In the back room, he moves aside several crates, revealing a heavy iron door set into the floor. "The old Spanish silver mine. The entrance tunnel runs right under my store. Kane's engineers, they say there's still millions in silver down there." "And that's why they won't take no for an answer," Sarah muses. "Mr. Martinez, I suggest you close up shop early today. Things might get messy." A commotion outside draws their attention. Through the window, Sarah sees Jackson and his men approaching, their numbers now swollen to nearly a dozen. The scarred enforcer swagger into the store, his men filling the doorway behind him. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood, I see you're an early riser." Jackson's mock politeness has been replaced by open menace. "Made your decision about our offer?" Sarah moves away from the counter, positioning herself where she has a clear view of all entrances. "Actually, I have a counter-offer for you, Mr. Jackson." Her voice carries clearly through the suddenly silent store. "You and your men are going to leave Silver Creek today, never come back." The silence breaks as Jackson's men burst into laughter. Their leader grins, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "And if we don't? Then I'm going to kill you." Sarah's tone is matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "All of you." The laughter dies as quickly as it began. Jackson's face darkens with rage. "You've got spirit, woman, I'll give you that. But you're starting to irritate me." He nods to his men. "Show her what happens to people who don't respect Mr. Kane's generosity." Two thugs move forward, brass knuckles glinting on their fists. They don't even bother drawing their guns. Why would they need to, against a defenseless widow? Sarah waits until they're 3 steps away. Then she moves. Her hands drop to the small of her back and come up holding the twin Remingtons. The first shot takes the leftmost thug in the knee, dropping him with a howl of pain. Before his partner can react, the second gun barks and brass knuckles clatter to the floor along with 3 fingers. The store erupts into chaos. Jackson's men scramble for their weapons, but Sarah is already moving, using the shelves for cover. 2 more shots ring out in quick succession, one shattering a bottle of whiskey next to a gunman's head, spraying glass into his eyes, the other punching through a thug's shoulder as he clears his holster. Shadow Hand Sarah, one of the older. Gunman breathes in recognition, his face going pale. "Sweet Jesus, it's Shadow Hand Sarah, the one and only," Sarah confirms, her guns tracking smoothly across the room. "Now who wants to be next?" Jackson, his own gun finally drawn, snarls in frustration. "Kill her, you idiots. She can't shoot all of us." "Want to bet?" Sarah's voice is cold as mountain snow. "Your men are packed in here like cattle. I've got 16 rounds left, and I haven't missed a shot in 15 years. As if to prove her point, she puts a bullet through the hat of a man trying to circle behind a barrel of flour. The shot is impossibly precise, leaving his scalp untouched, but ventilating his headwear. "Last chance," Sarah announces to the remaining men. "Drop your guns and walk away. I'm trying to keep my promise to my late husband about setting a good example for our son." For a moment no one moves, then one of the thugs slowly lowers his weapon, then another. Jackson watches in impotent rage as his men surrender one by one. "This isn't over," he spits. "Kane will hear about this. He'll send more men." "Good." Sarah's smile is razor-sharp. "Tell him, Shadow Hand." Sarah sends her regards. "And tell him that Silver Creek is under my protection now. If he wants a war, I'll give him one he'll never forget." The wounded are helped out by their companions, leaving trails of blood on Martinez's floor. Jackson is the last to leave, backing out with his gun still raised. "You just signed your death warrant, woman." "Better men than you have tried, mister." "Jackson." Sarah keeps her guns trained on the door until the last footstep fades. Only then does she lower them, turning to Martinez. "I'll help you clean up the mess." The old shopkeeper stares at her in amazement. "Senora, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Sarah begins reloading her Remingtons with practiced efficiency. This was just the opening move. Kane won't take this insult lying down. He'll send professionals next time, men who know who I am and what I can do. She looks out the window at the rapidly dispersing crowd of onlookers. Word of what happened here will spread like wildfire. By nightfall, every gunslinger and hired killer in Kane's employ will know that Shadow Hand Sarah has come out of retirement. "The real fight," she says softly, "is just beginning." Martinez pulls out a chair for her, his hands still shaking slightly. "My father used to tell stories about you and Thomas Blackwood. He said watching you two shoot was like watching a dance, beautiful and deadly." He hesitates. "Is it true what they say about Serpentine Canyon?" Sarah's eyes grow distant as she holsters her guns. 14 men. They thought they had us cornered." A faint smile touches her lips. "They didn't know about the cave system behind. The waterfall. Thomas went high, I went low. It was over in less than 2 minutes. The shop bell rings, interrupting her reminiscence. It's Mrs. Peterson carrying James. "Word spreading fast," she says, handing the baby to Sarah. "The telegraph. Operator says Kane's men are already sending messages to every hired gun between here and Kansas City." Sarah cradles her son, breathing in his innocent scent. Good, let them come. Every killer and bounty hunter that comes for me is one less working for Kane, terrorizing other towns. As if to punctuate her words, distant thunder rolls across the mountains. The storm that's been threatening all morning is finally moving in. Sarah watches the dark clouds gather, remembering another storm 5 years ago in Dodge City, the night she first met Thomas. He found me in a saloon, she says quietly, surprising both Martinez and Mrs. Peterson with the sudden story. I was working as a dealer, using my skills to catch cheaters. That night, 3 men decided to take exception to losing their money to a woman. Thomas stepped in, but before he could draw, I had 2 of them down. She smiles at the memory. He said it was the moment he fell in love with me. Mrs. Peterson leans forward, fascinated. Is that why they called you Shadow Hand? Because no one saw you draw? No. Sarah's voice turned serious. That name came later, after the Cortez brothers murdered Thomas's sister and her husband. We tracked them for 6 months across 4 territories. Every night, one of their men would disappear. No sound, no witnesses, just found dead in the morning with a single shot through the heart. Her eyes grow cold. By the time we caught up with the brothers, they were alone. Their entire gang had been whittled down one by one in the dark. Martinez crosses himself. Dios mío, and now Kane will bring this kind of war to Silver Creek? No, Mr. Martinez. Sarah stands adjusting her gun belt. Kane thinks he's bringing war here. What he doesn't realize is that he's walked into my killing ground. Every street, every alley, every rooftop. I've memorized them all since I arrived. In Serpentine Canyon we had the caves. Here I have the whole town. She moves to the window, watching as the first heavy drops of rain begin to fall. Jackson and his surviving men are gathered outside the saloon, several getting patched up by the town doctor. Their faces are a mixture of pain, fear, and burning. Hatred. Thomas always said there were 3 rules to surviving in our line of work, Sarah continues, bouncing James gently as he fusses. First, never let them see everything you can do. Second, always have an escape route. And third, she pauses as lightning flashes across the sky. Make sure the first man you kill is the one they're all afraid of. After that, the rest lose heart pretty quickly. Mrs. Peterson touches her arm gently. You're not alone in this fight, dear. Half the town's been waiting for someone to stand. Up to Kane. My Matthew would have wanted me to help, and there are others who feel the same. Sarah turns to her, expression softening. Thank you, but I need you to focus on keeping James safe. The men Kane sends next, they won't be like Jackson and his thugs. They'll be professionals, men I used to ride with, maybe even hunt with. They'll know my reputation, and they'll come prepared. What will you do? Martinez asks. Sarah checks her guns one last time, then covers them with her shawl. First, I'm going to take my son home and feed him. Then I'm going to write some letters, calling in old debts, warning old friends to either help me or stay clear. And tonight, her voice turns grim, tonight I'm going to remind Jackson why smart men fear the dark. As if on cue, another peal of thunder shakes the windows. The storm has arrived in Silver Creek, but Sarah knows it's nothing compared to the tempest of lead and blood that's about to be unleashed. Kane's men thought they were dealing with a helpless widow. Instead, they've awakened something far more dangerous, a mother protecting her child, a legend coming out of retirement, and a woman with nothing left to lose but the one thing she'll die to defend. Come on, little one, she whispers to James. Let's get you home before the rain gets worse. Mama has work to do tonight. Part 3. Gathering Storm. The afternoon rain has turned Silver Creek's dusty streets into rivers of mud, but the weather hasn't deterred the steady stream of newcomers. Arriving in town, from her vantage point in the boarding house, Sarah watches as another group of hard-faced men dismount outside the saloon. Their horses are quality stock, their gear well-maintained. Not common thugs like Jackson's crew, but professional gun hands. That makes 17 so far, Mrs. Peterson observes, counting heads from her rocking chair while cradling James. The elderly woman has refused to leave Sarah's side, insisting that a new mother needs help, especially in times like these. Sarah finishes sealing the last of her letters, each bearing a name that hasn't crossed her lips in years. Kane's not wasting any time. Those men aren't here for intimidation, they're hunters. She recognizes a few faces in the crowd below. The tall one with the silver spurs, that's Marcus Cole. He tracked outlaws for the Pinkertons before going private. And the Mexican in the black duster is Ramon Cortez. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened. Cortez? I thought you said... Different brother, Sarah explains, checking her ammunition stores. The youngest. He was just a boy when Thomas and I dealt with his older siblings. Looks like he's all grown up now. She frowns, studying his movements. And from the way he carries himself, he's learned to shoot. A knock at the door interrupts them. Sarah's guns appear in her hands, as if conjured by magic, but it's only Martinez's youngest son, Miguel. The boy's eyes go wide at the sight of her weapons. "Telegram for you, Senora Blackwood," he stammers, holding out an envelope. The operator said it was marked urgent. Sarah holsters one gun to take the message, keeping the other ready. The telegram is brief, but her expression darkens as she reads it. Sarah Stop Kane, offering $5,000 dead or alive, stop Winter's brothers. Accepting contract, stop get out now. Stop Gabriel Hawthorne. Bad news? Mrs. Peterson asks, noting Sarah's reaction. The Winters brothers. Sarah crumples the telegram. They were Thomas's friends once, before Kane bought their loyalty. 3 of them, all fast, all deadly. She turns to Miguel. Tell your father to spread the word. Anyone who doesn't need to be on the streets tomorrow should stay inside. The boy nods earnestly. Papa already told everyone. He said a storm is coming, but he wasn't talking about the rain. After Miguel leaves, Sarah begins methodically preparing for what's coming. She checks and rechecks her guns, then removes a false bottom from her trunk, revealing an arsenal that would impress a small army. Throwing knives, a sawed-off shotgun, ammunition, and various tools of her former trade. The Winters brothers won't come in shooting, she explains to Mrs. Peterson. They're smarter than that. They'll try to draw me out, maybe take hostages. She straps a knife sheath to her forearm. Kane's other men will create chaos, and the brothers will wait for their moment. How can you be so calm? Mrs. Peterson marvels. There must be 20 killers down there, all hunting you. Sarah's hands pause in their work. Because I'm not the same woman they're expecting. The shadow hand they knew worked alone, moved in darkness, but she didn't have a child to protect them. She checks the action on her shotgun. A mother defending. Her baby is more dangerous than any hired gun. As if sensing he's being discussed, James begins to fuss. Sarah takes him from Mrs. Peterson, humming softly as she rocks him. It's an old lullaby, one Thomas used to sing on quiet nights, when the ghosts of their past kept them awake. Your papa would be proud of you, she whispers to her son. He always said the measure of a person isn't in how many fights they win, but in what they choose to fight for. A commotion from the street draws her attention. Jackson has emerged from the saloon, his arm in a sling from the morning's encounter. He's arguing with Ramon Cortez, their voices carrying clearly in the rain-soaked air. The woman's mine, Jackson shouts. I don't care how much Kane's paying you. Cortez's response is too quiet to hear, but his meaning becomes clear when he casually draws his gun and shoots Jackson in the leg. The wounded man crumples, howling in pain, as Cortez turns to address the gathered gunmen. Let this be clear. His voice carries the soft accent of the Mexican borderlands. Kane's money goes to whoever brings her in, but the kill itself? His dark eyes fix on Sarah's window. That belongs to me. Sarah steps back from the window, her expression thoughtful. Well, that simplifies things. Cortez will try to force a formal duel. His family's big on honor and revenge. The others will either wait to see who wins or try to interfere for the bounty. And the Winters brothers? They'll play their own game. Sarah begins laying out clothes for tomorrow. A darker dress, better suited for movement and concealing. Weapons. John Winters was the one who taught Thomas the trick of using mirrors to shoot around corners. Michael specialized in long-range work. He once made a kill shot at 400 yards. And Luke, she pauses. Luke was the craftiest. He'd set up elaborate traps, create diversions. They're probably already planning something. As if to punctuate her words, a bottle smashes against the boarding house wall. Drunken laughter follows, along with a few half-hearted shots fired into the air. The hunters are getting restless. Mrs. Peterson, I need you to do something for me. Sarah retrieves a sealed envelope from her dresser. If anything happens to me tomorrow, take James and this letter to the telegraph office. It contains instructions for reaching Gabriel Hawthorne in Santa Fe. He'll make sure you both are taken care of. The older woman clutches James tighter. Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not. But Thomas always said, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Sarah begins braiding her hair tightly, her preparation ritual from the old days. Kane's men think they have me trapped, but they don't understand what they're dealing with. In the old days, I fought for money, for reputation. Now, she touches her son's cheek gently. Now I'm fighting for something worth dying for. That makes me more dangerous than they can imagine. As night falls over Silver Creek, the rain continues its steady drumbeat on the roof. In rooms and saloons across town, killers clean their guns and lay their plans. But in a modest boarding house room, a legend reborn rocks her baby to sleep, singing soft lullabies that can't quite drown out the thunder of the approaching storm. Tomorrow, Silver Creek will learn why mothers are the most dangerous predators of all. Tomorrow, the legend of Shadow Hand Sarah will either end in blood or be reborn in fire. And tomorrow, Victor Kane will learn the terrible price of threatening a gunfighter's child. In the darkness, Sarah Blackwood smiles, remembering Thomas's favorite saying, the most dangerous hand is the one that protects what it loves. The storm rages on, but in her heart, Sarah finds only calm. The time for hiding is over. Tomorrow, Shadow Hand. Sarah rides again. The evening deepens, and Sarah uses the cover of darkness to make her final preparations. Moving silently through her room, she retrieves a worn leather journal from a hidden compartment in her trunk, Thomas's old logbook. Inside are detailed notes about every gunfighter of consequence they'd ever encountered, including the Winters brothers. John Winters, she reads softly to Mrs. Peterson, right-handed, favors a cross draw, weakness in his left knee from an old injury, half a second slow on his spin. Michael, left-eye dominant, carries a modified Henry rifle with brass fittings. Luke, she pauses, studying the page. Luke's the real threat. Thomas wrote here that he once rigged an entire saloon with tripwires and flash powder just to catch one man. Mrs. Peterson, still cradling the sleeping James, leans forward. You knew them well. They were family once, Sarah says, her voice tinged with regret. Luke stood as best man at our wedding. John taught me that mirror-shooting trick himself. She closes the journal. But Kane's money changed them. After the Central Pacific Railroad massacre, they chose their side. A knock at the door interrupts them. Sarah draws both Remingtons before calling out, "Who is it?" "It's Miguel again, Senora." The boy's voice is trembling. "And someone else. He says he knows you. From Serpentine Canyon." Sarah moves to the side of the door, guns ready. "Step into the light where I can see you." The door opens slowly, revealing Miguel and a tall man in a weather-beaten duster. His face is heavily scarred on one side, and he's missing 2 fingers on his left hand. "Hello, Sarah," he says quietly. "Been a long time." "Jake, Deadeye, Cooper." Sarah doesn't lower her guns. "Last I heard, you were riding with the Winters brothers." He nods. Still am. John sent me to talk terms. Sarah's laugh is cold. Terms? The time for terms was before Cain's men threatened my son. This isn't about Cain anymore. Cooper removes his hat, revealing graying hair. John, Mike, and Luke, they don't want any part of this fight. But Ramon Cortez is forcing their hand. He's got men watching their families back in Kansas City. Sarah's expression softens slightly. Sit down, Jake. Miguel, tell your father we might need some coffee. As the boy scampers off, Cooper settles into a chair, keeping his hands visible. You look good, Sarah. Motherhood suits you. His scared face twists in a sad smile. Thomas would be proud. Talk terms, Sarah says, though she does lower one gun. Cortez wants a formal duel at dawn. Traditional Mexican style. 10 paces. Turn and fire. Cooper leans forward. The brothers will make sure no one interferes. After that, he spreads his hands. Whatever happens, happens. And if I refuse, then it gets messy. Cortez has 20 hired guns, ready to tear this town apart looking for you. And the brothers, he hesitates. Luke's already rigged half the buildings on Main Street with explosives. Says if you don't show, he'll light them all up at once. Sarah holsters her guns and moves to the window. The rain has finally stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under the moonlight. Below, she can see Cortez's men positioning themselves around town, setting up for tomorrow. You know why he wants this duel so badly? She asks. Cooper nods. His brothers. He was there that night, wasn't he, hiding in the chapel? Yes. Sarah turns back to face him. 14 years old, watching from the confession booth as Thomas and I dealt with his brothers. We never knew he was there. She picks up one of her Remingtons, checking the cylinder. The same guns I used that night. Poetic, isn't it? Sarah, Cooper says softly, the kid's good, real good. They say he's killed 12 men in formal duels. This year alone. 13, Sarah corrects. You forgot Marshall Hayes in Yuma. At Cooper's surprised look, she pats Thomas's journal. I keep track too. Mrs. Peterson, who has been quietly listening, speaks up. But why agree to a duel? Surely there's another way? Because, Sarah explains, it's the cleanest solution. One shot, one killer, and it's over. The alternative is a prolonged siege that puts every innocent in Silver Creek at risk. She turns to Cooper. Tell John I accept, with one condition. Win or lose, the Winters brothers make sure my son gets safely to Gabriel Hawthorne in Santa Fe. Cooper stands, replacing his hat. You have their word. And Sarah? He pauses at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Thomas. What Cain did to him, it wasn't right. After he leaves, Sarah begins her final preparations. She strips and cleans her guns one last time, then lays out her clothes for tomorrow. A black dress, cut for freedom of movement, with special reinforced. Seems to hold her holsters. You should try to sleep, Mrs. Peterson suggests. Soon. Sarah takes James from the older woman, holding him close. First, I need to write him a letter, just in case. She settles into the rocking chair, her son cradled in one arm while she writes with her free hand. My dearest James. She begins, her pen scratching softly against the paper. If you're reading this, then I failed to keep my promise to your father about leaving the old life behind. But I hope you'll understand. Some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for, and nothing in this world is more precious than you. The letter takes an hour to write. When she's done, Sarah seals it carefully and adds it to the packet. For Gabriel Hawthorne. Then she begins to sing softly, an old lullaby her mother used to sing, about a mother bear protecting her cub from hunters in the night. Outside, Silver Creek holds its breath, waiting for dawn. In saloons and boarding houses, killers and gunmen try to sleep, each dreaming of the bounty that awaits them. But in a quiet room above the street, a mother rocks her child and prepares for war. knowing that when the sun rises, she'll either add another chapter to her legend or join her beloved Thomas in the land beyond the sunset. And in the darkness, her guns gleam like promises, waiting to keep faith with the most sacred oath a mother can make, that nothing in heaven or earth will harm her child while she draws breath. The first hint of dawn paints the eastern sky in shades of purple and gold as Sarah finishes her preparations. Her black dress, chosen for this moment, bears no adornment save for the subtle bulge of her gun belt at the small of her back. She braided her hair tightly, the way she used to before a fight, with a single silver pin that Thomas gave her on their wedding day. "You don't have to do this," Mrs. Peterson says softly, watching as Sarah checks her Remingtons one final time. "We could still leave, find another town." "No," Sarah replies, her voice steady. "Running would just delay the inevitable. Kane's men would follow, and the next town might not be as willing to stand with us." She slides the guns into their holsters, with practiced grace. Besides, Thomas always said that some ground is worth dying for. A knock at the door reveals Miguel, his young face serious. "Senora, they're gathering in the street, Cortez and his men, and the Winters brothers." Sarah nods, then turns to Mrs. Peterson. "Remember what we discussed. If anything happens to me, get James to the stagecoach. Luke Winters will make sure you're not followed." She kisses her sleeping son's forehead, breathing in his innocent scent one last time. Tell him his mama loved him more than her own life." The pre-dawn air is crisp and clean after the night's rain. Main Street gleams like polished silver in the growing light, the boardwalk still slick with moisture. Sarah's boots click softly on the wooden steps as she descends from the boarding house. The street is lined with spectators, townspeople and gunmen alike, all keeping a respectful distance from the cleared area in the center. Ramon Cortez stands at the far end, cutting a dramatic figure in his black duster. The silver crucifixes on his gun belts catch the early light like stars. To one side, the Winters brothers maintain their position as neutral parties. John, the eldest, nods slightly to Sarah, a gesture that carries the weight of their shared history. Michael keeps his rifle ready, watching the rooftops for anyone who might interfere. Luke, the youngest, is nowhere to be seen, but Sarah knows he's watching from somewhere. "Senora Blackwood," Cortez calls out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "Or should I say, Shadow Hand Sarah, the woman who murdered my brothers in cold blood." "Your brothers died in a fair fight," Sarah responds, her tone measured. "They chose their path when they killed Thomas's sister." Cortez's face darkens. "They were my family, and Maria Blackwood was ours." Sarah takes her position at the near end of the street. "Your brothers tortured her for 3 days before killing her. The only mercy we showed was making their deaths." "Quick!" A murmur runs through the crowd. Even among hardened killers, the Cortez brothers' reputation for cruelty was legendary. Several of the hired guns exchange uncomfortable glances. John Winters steps forward, his voice carrying the authority of his years. "The terms are traditional. 10 paces, backs to each other. At my mark, you'll turn and fire. 1 shot only." He looks between them. "Any violation of these terms will be met with immediate response. Understood?" Both duelists nod. Sarah can feel the weight of her guns against her back, familiar as a lover's embrace. Thomas had these Remingtons made specially for her. Perfectly balanced, with triggers smooth as silk. "Take your positions," John commands. Sarah turns her back to Cortez, feeling the morning sun warm on her face. Time seems to slow, each heartbeat distinct and precious. She thinks of James sleeping peacefully above, of Thomas waiting somewhere beyond the veil, of all the choices that led her to this moment. 10 paces on my count, John's voice cuts through her reverie. 1. Sarah takes her first step, remembering Thomas's lessons. In a formal duel, he'd said, the first shot is never the killing shot. It's the setup, the tell that reveals your opponent's style. 2. Another step. She can hear Cortez's boots behind her, moving with practiced precision. He's done this before many times, but Sarah has something he doesn't, a reason to live that's stronger than his reason to kill. 3. The crowd is silent now, holding its collective breath. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell begins to toll the hour. 4. Sarah recalls the night she killed the Cortez brothers. The younger Ramon had been hiding in the confession booth, watching. She'd known he was there, but left him alive, thinking a boy deserved a chance at a different path. Now that mercy has come full circle. 5. Halfway there. Sarah's mind is crystal clear, her senses heightened. She can hear the creak of leather, smell gun oil and morning dew, feel the weight of her weapons like extensions of her body. 6. A baby's cry pierces the silence. James, awake in Mrs. Peterson's arms. Sarah's heart constricts, but her steps never falter. 7. 3 more steps. Sarah thinks of all the duels she's fought, all the lives she's taken. But this one is different. This one's for her son's future. 8. 2 more. She can feel Cortez's hatred radiating like heat at her back. He's waited 14 years for this moment. 9. 1 final step. Sarah's fingers twitch slightly, ready for the draw. Thomas always said the fastest draw wasn't about speed, it was about knowing the shot before you took it. 10. Turn and fire. The world explodes into motion. Sarah spins, her hands dropping to her guns with fluid grace. Time stretches like molasses as she sees Cortez turning, his black duster swirling, his hand moving to his holster with preternatural speed. But Sarah isn't watching his hand. She's watching his eyes, and in that fraction of a second, as their gazes meet across 20 feet of destiny, Ramon Cortez learns what his brothers learned too late, that the most dangerous killer isn't the fastest or the strongest. It's the one who's already chosen where their bullet will land before they even draw. Twin sounds shatter the morning silence, the crack of Cortez's Colt, followed instantly by the deeper boom of Sarah's Remington, and then the silence that follows seems to stretch for eternity. Both duelists remain standing, frozen in their firing positions. The crowd holds its breath, waiting to see who falls. Cortez's shot had been perfect, or would have been, against a normal opponent. The bullet passes through the space where Sarah's heart had been a split second before, but Sarah hadn't drawn straight up like most duelists. She dropped and rolled as she drew, a technique Thomas had developed for fighting multiple opponents. Her own shot strikes true. A small red flower blooms on Cortez's chest, directly over his heart. The same killing shot she'd used on his brothers 14 years ago. Madre de Dios, Cortez whispers, his eyes wide with recognition. The shadow step. Just like his legs buckle and he crumples to his knees, his unfired second pistol falling from nerveless fingers. Just like that night in the chapel. Sarah rises smoothly, keeping her gun trained on him. Your brothers died the same way. Family tradition, I suppose. Cortez manages a bitter laugh that ends in a cough. I spent 14 years practicing, 14 years dreaming of this moment. Blood trickles from the corner of his mouth. And you still move like a ghost. That's why they called her Shadow Hand, John Winters says quietly. By the time you see her move, you're already dead. Cortez sways, then topples forward, into the dust. Sarah holsters her weapon and walks to him, kneeling beside his body. With gentle fingers she closes his eyes. Go in peace, Ramon, she whispers. The debt is paid. The street erupts into chaos as Kane's hired guns realize their champion has fallen. Several reach for their weapons, but Michael Winter's rifle cracks once, twice, dropping 2 men before they can clear leather. The duel is done, John's voice booms over the commotion. Anyone who draws now answers to us. The threat carries weight. The Winters brothers' reputation is enough to make even hardened killers hesitate. But Sarah knows this isn't over. Kane's men exchange glances, some backing away, while others finger their weapons, uncertainty. Listen carefully. Sarah addresses them, her voice carrying clearly. I know Kane's paying you well, but ask yourselves, is his money worth dying for? Ramon Cortez was the best gun among you, and he's lying in the dirt. She surveys the crowd, coldly. I've got no quarrel with men doing a job. Leave now. Tell Kane that Silver Creek is off limits, and we all walk away. A tense moment follows. Then one of the hired guns turns his horse, spurring it toward the edge of town. Another follows. Then another. Within minutes, the street is clearing, leaving only the townspeople, the Winters brothers, and a handful of the most dedicated or foolhardy gunmen. Quite a speech, Luke Winters says, materializing from wherever he'd been hidden. But you know. Kane won't stop, not now. No, Sarah agrees, checking her gun before reloading. But we've bought some time, and thinned his ranks a bit. John Winters steps closer, keeping his voice low. Sarah, there's something you need to know about Kane, about what really happened to Thomas. Before he can continue, a shot rings out. From the saloon, Sarah moves instinctively, but the bullet wasn't meant for her. John Winters staggers, red spreading across his shirt. Sniper! Michael shouts, his rifle already rising toward the saloon's upper window. But whoever fired is already gone. Get him inside, Sarah commands, helping Luke support his brother's weight. More shots ring out as they drag John toward Martinez's store, bullets splintering the boardwalk around them. Inside, they lay John. On a table, his breathing is labored, but his eyes are clear as he grips Sarah's hand. Kane, he gasps. Thomas didn't die from poison. He was murdered. Kane's personal assassin, a woman called the Viper. She's here, in town. Sarah's blood runs cold. The Viper is more ghost story than person. A killer so subtle that her victims appear to die from natural causes. If she's truly behind Thomas's death. John, she squeezes his hand. Where is she? But John's eyes are growing distant. Should have Bird told you sooner, after the railroad massacre. Kane threatened our families. Had to play along. His grip weakens. Make it right, Sarah. For Thomas, his hand goes slack. Luke lets out a sound somewhere between a sob and a growl, while Michael turns to the window, his rifle ready. Sarah, Luke says urgently, if the Viper's really here, you and James aren't safe. She'll come for you next. But Sarah is already moving toward the door, her mind racing. The poison that killed Thomas had seemed so natural, a slow, wasting disease that even the best doctors couldn't identify. She'd accepted it as fate's cruel joke, that a man who'd survived countless gunfights would die so quietly. Now she knows the truth. Her husband's murderer is here in Silver Creek, probably watching her at this very moment, and somewhere above, her baby boy sleeps unprotected. Luke, she says sharply, get to the boarding house. Tell Mrs. Peterson to bar the doors and windows. Michael, I need your eyes on the roofs. The Viper will want high ground with clear lines of sight. She checks her guns grimly. It's time to go hunting. As she steps back into the street, Sarah feels a familiar coldness settling over her, the same icy calm that descended when she hunted the Cortez brothers. Kane has made a fatal mistake. He's not just facing Shadowhand Sarah anymore. He's facing a widow who just learned her husband was murdered, a mother whose child is threatened, and there's nothing more dangerous in all the Western Territories than that. Continue with the next section. The duel's outcome and immediate aftermath would follow, maintaining our dramatic tension while setting up the next phase of the story. The old Spanish mission looms against the darkening sky like the skeleton of a fallen giant. Its bell tower, still mostly intact, casts a long shadow across the overgrown courtyard where monks once tended their Gardens. The main chapel's roof has partially collapsed, leaving the cross-shaped interior open to the elements in places. Sarah approaches from the east, using the lengthening shadows for cover. Her dark dress blends with the growing darkness, making her nearly invisible as she moves from cover to cover. Thomas's voice echoes in her memory. The advantage isn't always about speed or accuracy. Sometimes it's about choosing the right ground. Through her spyglass, she studies the mission's layout, fresh boot prints in the dusty path leading to the main entrance, a glint of metal from the bell tower, probably Michael's position, covering her approach. And there, a flutter of expensive fabric through a broken window. The Viper is already inside, waiting, like walking into a spider's web, Sarah mutters, checking her weapons one final time. The twin Remington sits snug against her back, loaded with fresh ammunition. A derringer is strapped to her right ankle, a knife to her left. More blades are hidden in her hair and sleeves, but her most important weapon rides in a small glass vial tucked into her bodice, insurance against the Viper's favorite method of killing. As she nears the mission's outer wall, Sarah spots the first signs of preparation. Thin wires stretched between pillars, nearly invisible in the failing light. Broken glass scattered strategically along possible approach routes. The Viper's reputation for thoroughness is well earned. "Getting sloppy in your old age, V," Sarah whispers, noting the patterns. The traps are meant to channel any visitor toward the chapel's main entrance, the most obvious route, and therefore the most dangerous. Instead, Sarah moves to the mission's southern wall, where years of weathering have created handholds in the ancient stone. Thomas had taught her to always look up when planning an approach. Most folks, he'd said, forget that danger can come from above. The climb is treacherous in her dress, but Sarah manages it silently, years of practice guiding her movements. She reaches a broken section of roof and slides through, dropping into what was once the mission's library. Moonlight filters through gaps in the ceiling, illuminating rows of empty shelves and rotting furniture. A woman's voice drifts through the darkness, cultured and refined. "I was wondering when you'd join me, Sarah dear. Though I must admit I expected you to use the front door." Sarah freezes, then forces herself to relax. The voice seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, an old trick using the mission's acoustics. "Sorry to disappoint, V. But then, I was always a disappointment to the proper ladies." A soft laugh echoes through the chambers. "Oh, not at all. I've always admired your resourcefulness. It's what drew Thomas to you, I believe. That wonderful combination of refined upbringing and savage instinct." "Don't say his name." Sarah moves cautiously through the library, every sense alert for traps. "You lost that right when you murdered him." "Murder is such an ugly word." The Viper's voice shifts location, now seeming to come from the direction of the chapel. "I prefer to think of it as retiring as an obstacle. Nothing personal, you understand. Simply business." Sarah spots another tripwire, barely visible in the gloom. She steps over it carefully. "Was it business when you made him suffer? When you dragged it out for weeks instead of giving him a clean death?" "Ah, but that was the point, my dear. Cain wanted to send a message. Quick deaths create martyrs, lingering illness. A pause filled with cruel amusement. Well, that just creates despair." Rage burns in Sarah's chest, but she forces it down. Anger makes you careless, and she can't afford mistakes. Not now. "And what message is my son's death supposed to send?" "James." The Viper's tone turns thoughtful. "Oh, he won't suffer long. Children are so much more sensitive to certain compounds. It will look like a fever, nothing more. Just another tragic loss for poor widow Blackwood." Sarah's hands tighten on her guns, but she keeps moving, working her way closer to the voice. The library opens onto a corridor lined with empty confession booths. More memories surface. Ramon Cortez hiding in one just like these, watching his brothers die. "You seem very certain of your plan," Sarah calls out, testing the acoustics herself. "Confident that you've thought of everything." "I always do, dear. It's why Kane pays me so well." Something shifts in the shadows ahead. A figure moving. Or another distraction. "For instance, I considered that you might try to climb the south wall. The handholds there are quite convenient, aren't they?" Almost too convenient. Sarah's blood runs cold as she hears a distinct click beneath her feet. A pressure plate, hidden beneath the rotting carpet. She freezes mid-step. "In about 10 seconds, the Viper continues conversationally, "a rather nasty spring-loaded device will activate. Steel bolts, salvaged from a mining operation. Quite messy, really. Unless you take my original offer." "The tea is still warm, Sarah. A genteel death, peaceful, like drifting off to sleep. The same mercy I offered Thomas, though he foolishly refused." Sarah's mind races, calculating angles and options. The pressure plate is designed to trigger when weight is removed. Standard trap construction, but there's something about the Viper's tone. "Thomas refused because he knew what you really are," Sarah answers, buying time as she studies the floor around her. "A snake who sheds her skin, always hiding behind new faces. Is Mrs. Fairchild even your first disguise this year?" A longer pause. "Clever girl. You're playing for time, trying to figure out the mechanism. But there's something. You should know about that particular trap." Sarah sees it then. The slight irregularity in the carpet's pattern, not a pressure plate at all, but "it's a fake," she says, stepping forward confidently. "Just like the convenient handholds outside. You wanted me thinking about the floor, looking down, when you should have been looking up," the Viper finishes. Sarah dives forward as something whistles through the air where her head had been. She rolls to her feet, guns drawn, catching a glimpse of a shadowy figure retreating through a doorway. "Very good." The Viper's voice holds genuine approval. "Thomas taught you well, but then he always did have an eye for talent. It's part of why Kane wanted him eliminated. Can't have capable people with consciences in this new world we're building." "And what world is that?" Sarah moves cautiously toward the doorway, keeping to the shadows. "A world of order, my dear. Progress. No more petty local powers, no more territorial disputes. One railroad, one authority, one vision." The voice grows harder. "And no room for outdated notions of justice or revenge." Sarah reaches the doorway, finding herself at the entrance to the main chapel. Moonlight streams through the broken roof, illuminating the remains of the altar. And there, beside it, a familiar China tea service gleams. "You're right about one thing," Sarah calls out, scanning the upper galleries for movement. "Revenge is an outdated notion. This isn't about revenge." "No?" Genuine curiosity colors the Viper's voice. "Then what is it about, dear Sarah?" "Justice? That's what Thomas would say. Protection for the weak, punishment for the wicked." Sarah moves into the chapel, staying close to the walls. "But really, this is about a promise. A promise to my son that he'll grow up in a world where men like Kane can't simply murder anyone who stands in their way." A soft click echoes from above, the sound of a derringer being cocked. "Noble sentiments, but tell me, Sarah, how can you keep that promise if you're dead?" Sarah smiles in the darkness, finally pinpointing the Viper's location. "Who says I'm the one who's gonna die?" A soft chuckle floats down from the shadows. "Shh, there it is, that famous Blackwood confidence. Thomas had it too, right until the end. Even when the tremors got so bad he couldn't hold a spoon, he kept insisting. He'd beat it." Sarah circles the altar, her boots silent on the stone floor. The chapel's acoustics are tricky, but she's counting on the Viper's need to keep talking. Every word helps pinpoint her position in the upper gallery. "Tell me something," Sarah calls out, with genuine curiosity in her voice. That day on the riverboat in Sacramento, was that just reconnaissance, or were you already planning Thomas's death? Clever girl, remembering that. The Viper sounds pleased, like a teacher with a promising student. Actually, I was there for Judge Morrison. Such an unfortunate heart condition. But Thomas caught my attention. The way he watched everyone, noted every detail. I knew then he'd be a problem for Kane's plans. Sarah's mind flashes back to that day. The elegant woman at the poker table, playing with just enough skill to be interesting, but not enough to draw suspicion. The pearl necklace you were wearing, it was hollow, wasn't it? Filled with poison. Very good, though technically it was a neurotoxin, not a poison. Derived from pufferfish venom, modified to work slowly. Pride colors the Viper's voice. My own formula. The Chinese taught me the basics, but I've refined it considerably over the years. As they talk, Sarah is building a mental map of the chapel's upper level. 3 access points to the gallery, the bell tower stairs, the old choir loft, and, in there, a maintenance ladder partially hidden behind a fallen beam. It must get lonely, Sarah muses, moving closer to the ladder while appearing to examine the tea service. All those disguises, never being able to form real connections. Is Mrs. Fairchild even your first identity this month? A pause, slightly longer than the others. Sarah's words have struck a nerve. We all make sacrifices for progress, dear. Kane's vision requires specialists, people who can move unseen through society's layers. And what happens when Kane's vision is complete? When there's no one left to kill? Sarah palms one of her hidden knives, preparing for her next move. Do you really think he'll let you live, knowing all his secrets? This time the pause is definitely uncomfortable. You're trying to turn me against my employer. Rather amateur psychology, don't you think? Not at all. Just wondering if you've considered your own retirement plan. Sarah's voice turns casual. By the way, that tea set, it's not really English porcelain, is it? Chinese export ware. Mid-century. The glaze has a distinctive pattern. What? Real surprise in the Viper's voice. My mother was a collector, taught me to spot the differences. The Chinese pieces tend to be slightly thicker, more durable, better for hiding mechanisms, like, say, a spring-loaded needle in the cup's base. A sharp intake of breath from above. The Viper hadn't expected this level of knowledge about her. Tools, which makes me wonder, Sarah continues, what other little surprises you've brought. The blowgun strapped to your right forearm, the poisoned hat pin, or maybe... She smiles coldly. Maybe the Chinese ring with the hollow compartment, the one you used on Thomas. How did you... John Winters wasn't the only one keeping notes. Thomas suspected you from the start. He just couldn't prove it while the poison was working through his system. Sarah moves another step closer to the ladder. He documented everything, every symptom, every theory, left it all in his journal, which I found after he died. A journal? For the first time, uncertainty creeps into the Viper's voice. Where? Is it now? Oh, I made copies, sent them to newspaper editors across the territory, along with proof of Kane's other operations. If anything happens to me or James, they'll publish everything. Sarah's bluff is careful, measured. How long do you think Kane will keep you around once your methods become public knowledge? The sound of movement above. The Viper shifting, position unsettled. You're lying. Thomas couldn't have... Want to bet your life on that? Or more importantly... Sarah's voice hardens. Want to bet your freedom? I hear the prison in Yuma has a special wing for women who kill with poison. No windows, no visitors, just 4 stone walls until you die. A longer silence follows. Sarah uses it to close the final distance to the ladder, timing her steps to match the creaking of the old building in the wind. You know what I think? Sarah continues, playing her final card. I think that's why Kane really sent you, not just to kill me, but to clean up his loose ends. Tell me, Mrs. Fairchild, did he ask you to bring proof of my death? Something personal, like my wedding ring? The same way you brought him Thomas's pocket watch. The sharp crack of a derringer splits the silence. The bullet splinters the wood next to Sarah's head, but she's already moving, launching herself at the ladder. Damn you, the Viper snarls, her cultured accent slipping. You think you understand anything? Kane's vision is the future. Men like your husband, with their outdated notions of justice, they're just obstacles to progress. Sarah scales the ladder with fluid grace, guns appearing in her hands. No, V, I understand perfectly. You're just another killer who dresses up murder with fancy words. But here's the difference between us. She reaches the gallery level, facing the shadowy figure at last. I've never pretended to be anything else. In the moonlight, streaming through the broken roof, the two women face each other across the narrow gallery. The Viper is exactly as Sarah remembers from the riverboat. Elegant, aristocratic, with silver-streaked hair and eyes like frozen pond water. Her derringer looks tiny compared to Sarah's Remington's, but they both know it only takes one poisoned bullet. So, the Viper says softly, her composure returning. What happens now? Sarah's smile is cold as mountain snow. Now we find out if a snake's venom is faster than a shadow's bullets. Moonlight streams through the broken mission roof, casting stark shadows across the gallery where Sarah and the Viper face each other. The night wind whistles through gaps in the ancient walls, making the candles below flicker ominously. In the distance, a coyote howls, a lonely sound that seems to echo the tension in the air. You know, the Viper says conversationally, her derringer unwavering, I've always wondered what made Thomas choose you. A refined lady from Boston, trained in the best finishing schools, yet somehow you became the most feared gunfighter in the territories. Sarah's Remingtons remained steady, one trained on the Viper, the other covering the gallery's far exit. Maybe he saw something in me that people like you and Kane never could. A moral compass that money can't buy. Morality. The Viper's laugh is soft, cultured. My dear, morality is a luxury for those who've never had to survive by their wits. Did Thomas ever tell you about his time in Shanghai? About the things he did for the East India Company? Every detail, Sarah replied coldly. The difference is he learned from his mistakes. Choose a different path, while you... Her eyes narrow. How many identities have you burned through? How many lives have you destroyed for Kane's blood money? The Viper takes a careful step sideways, testing Sarah's reactions. Progress requires sacrifice, dear. The weak must make way for the strong. Surely a woman of your intelligence can see that Kane's vision is inevitable. Funny thing about progress, Sarah counters, matching the Viper's movement. It doesn't have to come at the cost of human lives. But then that would put you out of business, wouldn't it? Their deadly dance continues along the gallery, each woman looking for an advantage. Sarah notes every detail of her opponent. The way she favors her right leg slightly, the almost imperceptible tremor in her left hand. Age is catching up with the legendary assassin, though she hides it well. You're good, the Viper acknowledges. Very good. The way you spotted the fake pressure plate, deduced my position. Thomas taught you well, but there's something he could never teach you. A cruel smile plays across her aristocratic features. The patience of a snake. Sarah catches a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, a rope swinging in the wind, or something more sinister. That's your mistake, V, thinking this is about skill or patience. She takes another measured step. This is about a mother protecting her child, and there's nothing more patient than that. Ah, yes, young James. The Viper's voice drips with false concern. Such a beautiful child. Did you know I visited him yesterday, slipped into the boarding house while you were dealing with poor Ramon Cortez? Such peaceful sleep. It would have been so easy. Sarah's trigger finger tightens, but she forces herself to remain calm. You're lying. Mrs. Peterson never left his side. The old woman with the tragic past. Yes, she was quite vigilant, right up until her afternoon tea. The Viper's smile widens. "Don't worry. It was just a mild sedative, though I did leave a little insurance. Something in his bottle, perhaps, or maybe on his favorite toy. You'll never know for sure unless I take your deal," Sarah finishes. "The same choice you gave Thomas." "Precisely. The tea on the altar is the antidote to whatever I may or may not have given your son. One sip, and this all ends peacefully." The Viper's voice turns almost motherly. "Think of James, Sarah. Do you really want him to grow up an orphan?" For a moment, doubt flickers across Sarah's face. The Viper sees it and presses her advantage. "It's not so terrible, you know. The formula I use now is quite refined. No pain, no fear, just a gentle sleep." She gestures toward the altar with her free hand. "You can end this now. Be with Thomas again. And James, well, Kane has promised to ensure his future. The finest schools in Europe, every advantage." Sarah's response is a bitter laugh. "The same way you ensured Thomas's future, or John Winter's, or all the others who stood in Kane's way." Her voice hardens. "No, James deserves better than blood money and lies. Then you leave me no choice." The Viper's finger tightens on her Derringer's trigger. "Though I must admit, I'll miss our little chat. It's so rare to find someone who appreciates the artistry of what I do." "One last question," Sarah says, shifting her weight slightly. "That day on the riverboat, did you poison Judge Morrison's brandy before or after our poker game?" The Viper blinks, momentarily confused. "After, of course. During the evening reception when—" Wait. Her eyes widen as she realizes her mistake. Sarah's smile is predatory. "Thomas and I weren't at any evening reception. We left right after the poker game." Her guns don't waver. "You just confirmed everything. The judge's death, your connection. To Kane, all of it. Clever," the Viper acknowledges, "using my vanity against me. But it doesn't matter now. None of it does." Her Derringer shifts aim slightly. "Goodbye, Sarah. Give Thomas my regards." Several things happen at once. The Viper fires, her poisoned bullet cutting through the space where Sarah had been standing. But Sarah is already moving, dropping and rolling as she triggers the trap she'd set during their conversation, a modified version of the Viper's own pressure plate design. The gallery floor beneath the assassin's feet suddenly gives way, weakened, boards finally surrendering to gravity. The Viper leaps backward with surprising agility, but Sarah's second trap is waiting, a tripwire at ankle height. As the Viper stumbles, Sarah's Remingtons roar in perfect harmony. The first shot knocks the Derringer from the assassin's hand. The second punches through her shoulder, spinning her toward the gallery's edge. Time seems to slow as the Viper teeters on the brink. Her composed mask finally cracks, showing real fear as she realizes what's about to happen. She reaches for something in her sleeve, probably another hidden weapon. But Sarah is already in motion. "This is for Thomas," she says softly, and kicks the Viper over the edge. The assassin's scream is cut short by the impact 30 feet below. Sarah peers over the edge to see her sprawled across the altar, the elegant tea service shattered around her broken body. The cruel irony of the scene isn't lost on either of them. You knew," the Viper gasps, blood staining her fine dress. "About the pressure plate, the gallery. You led me here." "Like you said," Sarah replies, descending the ladder. "Thomas taught me well." She approaches the fallen assassin cautiously, guns ready. "The antidote, where is it?" The Viper manages a wet laugh. There is no antidote, because there was no poison. Your son was never in danger. I needed you unstable, emotional." A racking cough interrupts her words. Sarah kneels beside her, checking for hidden weapons with professional thoroughness. "And Kane, what are his plans for Silver Creek?" "The railroad." The Viper's voice grows weaker. "Silver Mine was just a distraction. He's building something bigger." Her eyes begin to glaze. In my room, at the hotel. Blue ledger. Everything's there. One last thing, Sarah says, her voice cold. The ring you used on Thomas, the one with the poison compartment. Where is it? The viper's bloody fingers fumble at her neck, pulling out a fine gold chain. On it hangs an ornate ring set with a black stone. My masterpiece. One scratch. That's all it took. Sarah takes the ring carefully, then stands. Was it worth it? All the death, all the lies, just to be Kane's attack dog. We're not so different. The viper's voice is barely a whisper now. Both killers. Both good at what we do. No, Sarah corrects her. I kill to protect what I love. You kill for money and Kane's approval. That's the difference between a mother bear and a snake. She aims her Remington one final time. Say hello to the Cortez brothers for me. The shot echoes through the mission like thunder. Outside, the coyote howls again, a sound of triumph this time. Sarah holsters her guns and retrieves the viper's derringer as evidence. Then she begins searching the body methodically, collecting every hidden weapon and vial she can find. A noise at the mission entrance makes her spin, guns drawn, but it's only Luke Winters. Heard the shots, he says, taking in the scene. Figured you might need help with cleanup. Sarah nods toward the body. Check for anything I missed. Then we need to get to the hotel. The Viper kept records, everything Kane's been planning. If we're lucky, it's enough to bring him down legally. And if we're not lucky, Sarah checks her ammunition, thinking of her son waiting safely in the boarding house cellar, of all the other children who might lose parents to Kane's ambitions if she doesn't stop him now. Then we do it the old-fashioned way, she says grimly. One bullet at a time. Luke starts to respond but freezes at the sound of approaching horses. Sarah melts into the shadows beside the altar, guns ready, as multiple riders approach the mission. Sounds like Kane's cleanup crew, Luke whispers, taking position on the other side. Right on schedule. Sarah checks her remaining ammunition. How many do you make? From the hoofbeats? At least 6, maybe 8. Luke pulls his own revolvers. They'll have the building surrounded. Good. Sarah's smile is dangerous in the moonlight. That means they can't escape either. The riders dismount outside, their boots crunching on. The gravel. A rough voice calls out, Mrs. Fairchild, Mr. Kane sent us to ensure your success. Everything all right there? Sarah pitches her voice to Carrie, mimicking the Viper's refined accent perfectly. Quite all right, gentlemen. Our friend Mrs. Blackwood and I were just finishing our discussion. Do come in. Luke raises an eyebrow, impressed by the impersonation. Sarah had learned that trick from Thomas too, the ability to become someone else in an instant, a skill that had saved their lives more than once. Heavy footsteps approach the entrance. Sarah counts them silently. 1, 2, 3. 8 men. Total. Kane isn't taking chances. The first 2 gunmen enter the chapel, lanterns held high. They spot the Viper's body immediately and reach for their guns, but Sarah and Luke are already moving. Sarah's Remingtons bark twice, dropping both men before they can clear leather. Luke's shots take down a third, trying to retreat through the doorway. The remaining 5 scatter for cover, returning fire wildly in the darkness. You're all dead, one of them shouts, fear making his voice crack. Kane's got 100 more, just like us. You can't kill everyone. I don't need to, Sarah calls back, moving silently through the shadows. Just everyone who threatens my son. She spots movement behind a fallen beam and puts a bullet through it, earning a scream of pain. Luke works his way around the other side, using the confused crossfire to pick off another gunman trying to reach the door. 4 down, he updates quietly. A bullet splinters the wood next to Sarah's head, but she doesn't flinch. Instead, she drops and rolls, coming up behind a pillar with both guns blazing. 2 more bodies hit the floor. The last 2 gunmen make a break for the entrance, but they've forgotten about Michael. His rifle cracks twice from the bell tower, and the night falls silent, except for the echo of gunshots rolling away across the desert. Sarah moves through the aftermath with mechanical efficiency, checking bodies, collecting weapons. These aren't professional killers like the Viper, just hired muscle meant to clean up loose ends. Found something, Luke calls, searching one of the dead men. He holds up a telegram. Orders from Kane. They were supposed to burn the mission with everyone inside, make it look like an accident. Sarah reads the telegram, her expression hardening. 8 men, just to cover up one murder. Kane must be desperate to keep his secrets. Speaking of secrets, Luke gestures to the Viper's body. What do you want to do about her? Sarah kneels beside her fallen enemy, studying the face that had haunted Thomas's final days. In death, the Viper looks smaller somehow, less mythical. Just another killer whose luck finally ran out. We'll bury her in the mission cemetery, Sarah decides. Unmarked grave, no marker. Let her fade into nothing, like all her fake identities. She removes a small notebook from the Viper's bodice, another piece of evidence against Kane. But first, we need to get to that hotel room. Whatever's in that blue ledger, Kane was willing to kill a lot of people to keep it hidden. Michael appears in the doorway, his rifle still smoking slightly. Town's stirring after all the gunfire. Won't be long before people come investigating. Sarah nods, formulating a plan. Luke, you and Michael handle things here. Make it look like a gang fight gone wrong. Kane's men shooting each other over the bounty. I'll get to the hotel before someone thinks to check the Viper's room. Are you sure about going alone? Luke asks, concerned. Kane might have more. Men watching the hotel. Good. Sarah reloads her Remingtons with practiced efficiency. That means they can lead me straight to him. She retrieves the Viper's ring from around the dead woman's neck. Besides, I made a promise to Thomas. Kane's going to answer for what he did one way or another. As she turns to leave, Luke calls after her. Sarah, what you said before about doing this the old-fashioned way. He gestures at the carnage around them. This is starting to feel like the old days, back when you and Thomas were cleaning up the territories. Sarah pauses in the doorway, moonlight silvering her profile. The old days died with Thomas. This isn't about cleaning up the territories anymore. Her voice carries the finality of a judge's gavel. This is about making sure my son grows up. In a world where men like Kane can't just murder their way to power. She steps into the night, leaving Luke and Michael to their grim task. The wind has picked up, carrying the scent of sage and gun smoke across the desert. Somewhere in Silver Creek, in a hidden cellar room, her son sleeps peacefully, unaware of the night's violence, and in a hotel room across town, a blue ledger waits, the key to bringing down the man who ordered Thomas's death. Sarah Blackwood walks through the darkness like a ghost, her guns still warm at her back. The night's work isn't done yet, but with each step, she's closer to fulfilling her promise, both to Thomas and to James. A promise written in blood and gunsmoke, sealed with a mother's love and a widow's vengeance. Kane's reckoning is coming, and this time there's no Viper to fight his battles for him. Silver Creek's Grand Hotel stands dark against the star-filled sky, its windows mostly darkened except for a few late-night lamps. Sarah approaches from the shadowy side street, noting the 2 drunk men lounging against the hitching post, more of Kane's watchers, their alertness betrayed by their too careful postures. The memory of Thomas's voice guides her movements. The best way past a guard is to be someone they don't think to guard against. With practiced ease, Sarah adjusts her bearing, adopting the slightly unsteady gait of a respectable widow who's had one too many glasses of sherry at a late social call. "Evening, ma'am." One of the watchers tips his hat as she totters up the hotel steps, her dark dress now speckled with desert dust to complete the illusion. Need any help?" "Oh no, thank you," Sarah giggles, perfectly mimicking the nervous flutter of a proper lady addressing strange men at night. "Just returning from Widow Patterson's Literary Society meeting. We got rather carried away, discussing Mr. Dickens' latest—" The men's eyes glaze over at the mention of literature, just as she'd expected. She makes it through the hotel doors, without further questioning, maintaining her unsteady act until she's out of their sight. Inside, the hotel's grand lobby is dimly lit and mostly empty, save for a half-asleep clerk at the front desk. Sarah knows she can't risk asking about Mrs. Fairchild's room. That would draw too much attention. Instead, she heads for the stairs, projecting the confidence of someone who belongs. The hotel's second floor is quiet, the thick carpeting muffling her footsteps as she counts doors. "Corner suite," she mutters, remembering the Viper's preference. A brass number 12 gleams on the last door. Sarah presses her ear against it, listening for any movement inside. Nothing. The lock poses no challenge to someone trained by Thomas Blackwood. Within seconds, she's inside the darkened suite, closing the door silently behind her. The room's still, holds traces of the Viper's presence, a lingering scent of jasmine, an empty teacup on the side table, a newspaper folded to the financial pages. Now, where would a snake hide her secrets? Sarah whispers, beginning her search. The obvious. Hiding places yield nothing. No blue ledger in the desk drawers, under the mattress or behind the dresser. But Sarah knows the Viper's type. She examines the room's fixtures with a professional eye. The mirror above the dresser catches her attention, hanging slightly lower than standard hotel mounting would dictate. Perfect. Height for a woman of the Viper's stature to access easily. Sure enough, the mirror swings away from the wall on hidden hinges, revealing a small wall safe. Sarah allows herself a grim smile. Predictable after all, V. The safe's combination proves more challenging, but Sarah didn't spend years working with Thomas without learning a few tricks. She presses her ear to the cold metal, fingers working the dial with delicate precision. 5 minutes later, she's rewarded with a soft click. Inside, she finds what she's seeking, a blue leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with the Viper's elegant handwriting. But there's more. A stack of letters bearing Kane's personal seal, photographs of prominent men in compromising positions, and most damning of all, a list of names. Each one a person who died mysteriously after opposing Kane's interests. As Sarah flips through the ledger, her blood runs cold. The Viper hadn't just been Kane's assassin. She'd been his architect of corruption. The pages detail an intricate web of blackmail, bribery, and murder stretching across 3 territories. Judges, politicians, business rivals, all either bought or buried. "Thomas, you were right," Sarah breathes, reading entries about the railroad massacres. "Kane's been planning this for years. The silver mine was just the beginning." A floorboard creaks in the hallway. Sarah freezes, then quickly returns everything to the safe except the ledger and a few key documents. She's just closing the mirror. When the door handle turns, Sarah draws her gun, pressing herself against the wall beside the door. It opens slowly, revealing a young maid with fresh towels. The girl catches sight of Sarah's reflection in the mirror and opens her mouth to scream. In one fluid motion, Sarah holsters her gun and clamps a hand over the maid's mouth, pulling her into the room and closing the door. "Shh," she soothes. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm investigating Mrs. Fairchild. You've seen her, yes?" The maid nods, eyes wide with fear. "Did she give you anything to deliver? Letters, packages?" Another. Sarah releases her slowly. The girl whispers, "Every morning at 8. A letter for Mr. Kane's man at the telegraph office. She paid extra for discretion." "Smart girl. Did you read any of them?" "No, ma'am. But—" The maid hesitates. "Sometimes, when I'd bring her breakfast, she'd be meeting with men, important men from the railroad company. They'd stopped talking when I entered, but I heard things about silver mines and something called Project Phoenix. Sarah's interest sharpens. Project Phoenix? What else do you remember? Just that it scared them. One man, a banker I think, said it would change the face of the territories forever. Mrs. Fairchild laughed and said that was the point. Sarah presses a gold coin into the maid's hand. You never saw me. If anyone asks, the room was empty when you came to deliver towels. Understand? The girl nods eagerly, clutching the coin. As she turns to leave, Sarah adds, One more thing. What's your name? Jenny, ma'am. Jenny, take my advice. Find a new job far from this hotel. Things are going to get unpleasant here very soon. After the maid leaves, Sarah returns to the ledger, focusing now on entries mentioning Project Phoenix. The details are scattered, encrypted, but a pattern emerges. Kane isn't just buying up silver mines and railroad lines, he's creating a private empire. The mines are meant to fund a personal army, disguised as railroad security, and the ultimate, a goal. My God, Sarah whispers, reading the final entry. He's planning a coup, take over the entire territory, set himself up as some kind of corporate kingpin. She thinks of Thomas, of John Winters, of all the others who died trying to expose Kane's plans. No wonder he needed everyone to be silenced. The sound of boots on the stairs interrupts her thoughts. Heavy footsteps, multiple men, not hotel staff. Sarah quickly photographs the most damning pages of the ledger with her mind, then places it and the other documents in her satchel. The mirror swings back into place just as voices approach in the hallway. Check every room, a gruff voice orders. Kane wants confirmation that the woman's dead and any evidence secured. Sarah looks around quickly, assessing options. The window opens onto a narrow ledge, risky in the dark, but better than facing what sounds like half a dozen armed men. She slips out just as the door bursts open, carefully closing the window behind her. The cool night air whips at her dress as she edges along the ledge, pressing herself flat against the wall. Below, more of Kane's men are gathering in the street. They know something's wrong. The lack of communication from the mission must have alerted them. Sarah reaches the corner of the building, where an ornamental column offers a possible route down. It's a dangerous climb, especially one-handed, while holding the satchel with the precious evidence. But as Thomas used to say, sometimes the only way out is down. She begins her descent, timing her movements to coincide with the shouts and movements of the men below, using their noise to cover any sounds she might make. 3 stories up, with priceless evidence against Kane, and a small army of gunmen between her and safety. Sarah Blackwood smiles in the darkness. Just another night of making things right in the territories, and somewhere in Silver Creek, her son sleeps peacefully, watched over by friends who understand that sometimes justice requires a mother's touch and a widow's aim. She's halfway down the column when one of Kane's men happens to glance up. Sarah freezes, using the shadows for cover, but her luck runs out as a passing cloud reveals her silhouette against the hotel's pale walls. Up there, the man shouts. On the wall! Bullets spark against the stonework around her. Sarah gauges the distance to the ground, still too far for a safe drop. But there's a decorative awning over the hotel's side entrance, its canvas surface looking sturdy enough to break her fall. More shots ring out as Sarah makes her decision. Clutching the satchel tight, she pushes off from the column, angling her body toward the awning. Time seems to slow as she falls, Thomas's voice echoing in her memory. When you're falling, girl, make sure you roll. It's not the fall that kills. It's the landing. She hits the awning at an angle, the canvas giving way just enough to absorb the impact before tearing. Sarah rolls with the momentum, coming up in a crouch behind a water trough as bullets pepper the ground around her. Circle around, someone yells. Don't let her reach the street. Sarah checks her guns, both Remingtons still ready, plus the hidden derringer at her ankle. The satchel with the ledger is secure across her body. Now she just has to make it through about 10 armed men to reach safety. "Come on out, lady," one of Kane's men calls. "We just want the papers. Cooperate, and maybe Mr. Kane will be merciful." Sarah's response is a carefully aimed shot that takes the speaker's hat off, along with a lock of his hair. As he dives for cover, she uses the distraction to sprint toward the nearest alley. 2 men try to block her path. Sarah drops and slides between them, her dress gathering mud, but her guns finding their targets. Both men fall, clutching wounded legs. She doesn't want to kill if she doesn't have to. Dead men can't testify against Kane later. The alley proves to be a mistake. It's blocked by construction materials. Kane's men must have anticipated someone might use it as an escape route. Sarah presses herself against the wall, listening to boots approaching from both directions. Then she spots it, a half-finished building beside the alley, its skeleton of wooden beams reaching toward the sky. The construction platforms could provide a path across to the next block if she's quick enough. Sarah holsters one gun and begins to climb, using the building's frame like a ladder. Below, Kane's men finally spot her and open fire again. But the darkness and her moving target make their shots go wide. Reaching the first platform, Sarah finds what she needs: a stack of lumber and a rope pulley system. She quickly judges the angles, remembering a trick Thomas taught her during a bank job in San Francisco. "Sometimes," he'd said, "the best escape route is the one your enemies think is impossible." Sarah waits until several men enter the alley below, then kicks the lumber stack. The heavy boards cascade down, forcing the gunmen to scatter. In the confusion, she grabs the pulley rope and swings out over the alley, using her momentum to carry her to the roof of the adjacent building. Rolling across the rooftop, Sarah allows herself a brief smile at the shouts of frustration below, but her victory is short-lived as a bullet whines past her ear. A rifleman on the hotel roof, one she hadn't spotted earlier. She scrambles behind a chimney as more shots chip away at the bricks. The rifleman is good, his aim getting closer with each shot. Sarah checks her options. The next building is too far to jump, and the street below is still watched. Then she remembers something from the Viper's ledger, a detail about Kane's men and their patterns. "Every operation has 3 layers," the assassin had written. The visible force to draw attention, the hidden backup to catch runners, and the elite shooter to finish the job. The shooter is always alone. Easier to pay one man well than trust a team. Sarah peers carefully around the chimney, studying the rifleman's position. He's silhouetted against the hotel's lit windows, a rookie mistake. She can see him working the bolt of his rifle, taking careful aim at her hiding spot. "One shooter," she whispers. "One shot." She throws her hat out to the left of the chimney. The rifleman's shot shreds it instantly, but he has to work the bolt again before he can fire. In that moment, Sarah leans out the other side and puts a bullet through his shoulder, not fatal, but enough to end his part in the night's events. With the high ground secured, Sarah has a clear view of the street. Kane's men are regrouping, likely planning to search the building she's on, but they've left their horses unguarded at the hotel's hitching post. Sarah measures the distance to the nearest facade decoration, a sturdy-looking gargoyle that might support her weight. Another crazy plan forms in her mind, the kind that Thomas would have loved, using her spare rope, a tool no frontier widow should be without. She creates a quick anchor point around the chimney. Then, taking careful aim, she shoots out the hotel's main electric light, plunging the street into darkness. In the confusion that follows, Sarah rappels down the building's face, using the gargoyle as a pivot point. She lands softly behind the hitching post, where the horses are getting nervous from all the gunfire. A quick slash of her knife frees the reins of all but one horse. Then, with a sharp slap to the nearest animal's flank, she sends the herd stampeding down the street. Kane's men scatter to avoid the panicked horses, giving Sarah the moment she needs. She swings into the saddle of the remaining horse, noting with satisfaction that it's the finest of the lot, probably belonging to Kane's lieutenant. The animal responds beautifully to her commands as she wheels it around and gallops away. From the chaos, behind her shots and shouts fade into the night. The precious ledger is secure in her satchel, and she's left Kane's men with a clear message. They're not dealing with some helpless widow anymore. As she rides toward her rendezvous, on point with Luke and Michael, Sarah pats the satchel containing proof of Kane's crimes. The night's work has yielded more than just evidence. It's given her a clear picture of what she's fighting against. Project Phoenix isn't just another railroad scheme. It's Kane's vision of a new order in the territories, one built on corruption and enforced by killers like the Viper. If he succeeds, there won't be any place left for honest people, for law, for justice. Sarah checks her guns, already planning her next move. Kane will know by now that the Viper has failed, that his secrets are exposed. He'll be desperate, dangerous, good, because Sarah Blackwood is done playing defense. It's time to take the fight to Kane himself, and this time she has something he doesn't, a mother's determination to create a better world for her child, no matter the cost. The pre-dawn hours find Sarah, Luke and Michael gathered in Martinez's store cellar, poring over the documents from the Viper's safe by lamplight. The blue ledger lies open on a barrel, its pages revealing the full scope of Kane's operation. "Look at these shipping manifests," Michael says, holding a document closer to the lamp. "He's not just bringing in railroad supplies. Weapons, ammunition, enough to outfit a small army." Luke nods grimly. "And these payroll records. He's been recruiting ex-soldiers, Confederate veterans mostly, men with combat experience who hold grudges against the government." Sarah traces a line in the ledger with her finger. "Project Phoenix. Kane's not building a railroad empire. He's building an insurgency. Once he controls the silver mines and rail lines, he'll have a stranglehold on the entire territory's economy. And anyone who stands against him ends up like Thomas," Luke adds softly. "Or John." The mention of her husband makes Sarah pause, remembering. Thomas suspected something like this at the end. He was tracking Kane's weapon shipments, trying to prove they weren't just for railroad security. She pulls out a folded paper from her bodice. "That's why I kept this." The others lean in to look. It's a hand-drawn map, the paper yellowed with age. Thomas's precise handwriting marks locations across the territory. Weapon caches, secret meeting points, names of Kane's conspirators. "He made this the week before he died," Sarah explains. "Said if anything happened to him, I should take it to the territorial governor. But then the Viper struck, and with a newborn son to protect..." She trails off, the weight of past choices heavy in her voice. "Well, now we have proof." Michael taps the ledger. "With this evidence, the governor would have to act. Except Kane's thought of that too." Sarah flips to another page. "Look here, he's got judges in his pocket, senators on his payroll. Even if we got this to the governor, Kane's people would bury it in legal challenges until his plan is ready." Luke runs a hand through his hair in frustration. "So what's our play? We can't just let him get away with this." Sarah stands, moving to where her guns lie cleaned and ready on a workbench. "We do what Thomas would have done. What the law can't or won't do, we do ourselves." She checks her ammunition with practiced efficiency. Kane's going to be vulnerable. Now, with the Viper dead and his secrets exposed, he'll have to move fast, maybe faster than he's prepared for. "He'll come for you first," Michael warns. "You and James." "No." Sarah's voice carries absolute certainty. "He'll come for the ledger. Everything he's built depends on secrecy. Once that's gone..." She loads her Remingtons with deliberate care. Besides, he knows threatening James would be signing his own death warrant. A knock at the cellar door makes them all reach for weapons, but it's only Mrs. Peterson with a breakfast tray. As she sets it down, Sarah notices her hands trembling. Slightly, More of Kane's men arrived on the morning stage, the older woman reports. They're saying there was some kind of riot at the mission last night, and Mrs. Fairchild. She hesitates. They're asking if anyone's seen her. Sarah shares a look with Luke. The cover story they'd arranged for the mission shootout is holding, at least for now. What about James? Sarah asks, still sleeping peacefully. That lovely Chinese family who runs the laundry has agreed to hide him in their basement if needed. Kane's men won't think to look there. Sarah nods gratefully. She'd chosen the Zhang family carefully. They'd helped Thomas once, hiding him from bounty hunters. Their hatred of Kane's railroad practices makes them reliable allies. Martinez's boy brought this too. Mrs. Peterson hands Sarah a telegram. Came in an hour ago. Sarah reads it quickly, her expression darkening. Kane's called a town meeting for noon, says he wants to address recent unfortunate events and make an announcement about the railroad's future plans. It's a trap, Luke says immediately. He's trying to draw you out. Of course it is. Sarah begins gathering her gear, but it's also an opportunity. Kane will have his guard down, thinking he's in control, and he'll have brought his conspirators together in one place. Michael raises an eyebrow. You're not thinking of confronting him publicly? No. Sarah's smile is cold as mountain snow. I'm thinking of letting him hang himself. The ledger proves he's been embezzling from his own investors. Once they learn the truth about Project Phoenix, about how he plans to use them as pawns in his private war, they'll turn on him, Luke finishes, understanding dawning. And without their backing, his whole plan falls apart. Exactly, but you first... Sarah pulls out Thomas's map again. We need to verify these weapon caches. If we can prove Kane's stockpiling arms for an insurgency, even his pet judges won't be able to protect him. The next few hours are a whirlwind of preparation. Michael takes his rifle to scout the cached locations on Thomas's map. Luke works with Martinez to spread word among the townspeople they trust, preparing them for what's coming. Sarah visits the Zhang family's laundry, holding James one last time before leaving him in their care. Mrs. Zhang, a tiny woman with steel in her spine, promises to protect him with her life. Your husband helped us keep our business when Kane's men tried to force us out, she says in careful English. We repay our debts. Back in the cellar, Sarah dons a different dress, dark blue, practical with hidden pockets for extra ammunition. She straps on her gun belt, checks each weapon meticulously. Then she does something she hasn't done since Thomas died. She pins his old marshal's badge to her bodice. He was wearing this the day we met, she tells Luke, who's watching curiously. Said as long as he had it, he was bound to uphold the law, even when the law itself was broken. She touches the badge gently. Seems fitting to wear it now. Sarah. Luke hesitates. John would want you to know something. About the day Thomas died, he tried to get the antidote from Kane and offered him anything. Kane just laughed and said Thomas should have thought about his family before choosing the wrong side. Sarah absorbs this information, her face hardening. Did John say anything else? Just that Kane kept Thomas's pocket watch as a trophy. Wear it every day, he said. A cold smile touches Sarah's lips. Good to know. Michael returns as the town bell strikes 11, his report confirming their worst fears. The weapon caches are real, and they're just the beginning. Kane's men are arming, in secret all across the territory, waiting for his signal. It gets worse, Michael adds. I overheard some of his new arrivals talking. Kane's planning to make his move within the week. The town meeting isn't just for show. He's going to announce a special investment opportunity in the railroad. Get the whole town bought in before he reveals his true plans. Sarah checks the time on her own watch, Thomas's sister's last gift to her. Then we'd better make sure that meeting takes an unexpected turn. She begins laying out documents. From the ledger, selecting the most damaging. Michael, get these copies to every business owner in town. Luke, make sure the telegraph operator sends these messages to Kane's investors. And you, Luke asks, though he already knows the answer. I'm going to have a private word with Kane before the meeting. Sarah loads one final bullet into her Remington. Thomas always said the best time to confront a snake is when it thinks it's about to strike. As her companions depart on their missions, Sarah takes a moment to write one last letter to James. Just in case. She seals it carefully and gives it to Mrs. Peterson, with instructions to add it to the others if anything happens to her. Then Sarah Blackwood, widow of Thomas Blackwood and mother of James, steps out into the brightening day. Kane wants a showdown? She'll give him one he'll never forget. It's time to finish what Thomas started. Time to show Kane that some widow's weeds hide thorns sharp enough to pierce even a railroad baron's armor. Before leaving the cellar, Sarah takes one final look at the Viper's ring, the instrument of Thomas's death, now a cold weight in her palm. She thinks of slipping it into her pocket, but decides against it. Instead, she places it carefully in a small wooden box alongside Thomas's letters. For James, she tells Mrs. Peterson, when he's old enough to understand, he should know how. His father died, and why? The older woman clutches the box to her chest. He'll understand, Sarah. Any child would be proud to know their father died fighting for what's right. Sarah touches the marshal's badge on her bodice. Thomas used to say there are two kinds of legacy a parent can leave their child: the easy path of looking away from evil, or the hard road of standing against it. Her voice softens. I want James to know we chose the hard road for him, so he could grow up in a world worth living in. Luke returns with news from the telegraph office. Kane's investors are already responding to those messages. Seems they're not happy about their money being used to build a private army. Good. Sarah checks her hidden knife sheaths. Kane's power comes from other people's greed. Once they realize he plans to sacrifice them for his own ambitions. Speaking of plans, Michael interrupts, entering through the back door. I found something else in one of those weapon caches. This. He places a document on the barrel beside the ledger. Sarah's eyes widen as she reads it. A list of targets. Everyone Kane plans to eliminate once Project Phoenix begins. She runs her finger down the names. Judges, lawmen, newspaper editors, anyone who might stand against him. Look at the last page, Michael says grimly. There, under a heading marked Phase 1, is a list of children's names, sons and daughters of powerful men across the territory. Among them, written in the Viper's elegant hand, James Blackwood, leverage if needed. Sarah's hands tighten on the paper until her knuckles show white. He's planning to use hostages. Children have insurance to keep their parents in line. There's more, Luke adds. Been talking to folks around town. Kane's men have been buying up property through front companies, positioning themselves in every important family in the territory. They're ready to move as soon as he gives the word. Sarah absorbs this information, her tactical mind spinning possibilities. The town meeting. He's not just announcing his plans, he's gathering potential hostages, all the prominent citizens in one place. Easy to control, Michael finishes, or eliminate if they refuse to cooperate. Mrs. Peterson, who has been listening quietly, speaks up. Sarah, I remember something. The day he died. He was trying to tell me something about Kane's pocket watch. Said it wasn't just a trophy, it was... Was what? He never finished. The pain got too bad. But he kept pointing at his own watch, the one Mary gave him, like he was trying to tell me they were connected somehow. Sarah frowns, remembering. Thomas's sister Mary had given them matching watches as wedding gifts, precision timepieces, from Switzerland, with secret compartments built into their cases. They'd used them to pass messages during their law enforcement days. The watch Kane took from Thomas, Sarah says slowly. He didn't just take it as a trophy. He took it because... Because Thomas hid something in it, Luke realizes. Something Kane never found. Sarah's mind races. What had Thomas discovered in those final days while she was away? What evidence had he hidden where even the Viper couldn't find it? Change of plans, she announces. Before the town meeting, I need to get close enough to Kane to examine that watch. That's suicide, Michael protests. He'll be heavily guarded. Not at the barbershop. Sarah allows herself a small smile. Kane's vain enough to keep to his usual schedule, especially when he wants to project confidence. And according to this ledger, he always visits Claude's for a shave at 11:30 before important meetings. Luke checks his pocket watch. That's in 20 minutes. Plenty of time. Sarah begins making adjustments to her appearance, letting her hair down and smudging a bit of dirt on her cheek. Kane's never met me in person. He won't recognize Thomas Blackwood's widow as a distressed cleaning woman. She prepares her disguise. Sarah thinks about Thomas's last days. Had he known what was coming? Had he hidden evidence of Kane's plans in that watch, trusting her to find it someday? One more thing, she tells her companions. If this goes wrong, if Kane realizes who I am, we'll get James to safety, Mrs. Peterson promises. The Zhang family has a network of Chinese laborers who hate Kane. They can smuggle him all the way to California if needed. Sarah hugs the older woman, then turns to Luke and Michael. Whatever happens in the next few hours, know that I'm grateful. For your help, your loyalty. She touches John's gun on Luke's hip. For everything. Just remember what Thomas used. To say, Luke replies gruffly, the most dangerous hand is the one that protects what it loves, Sarah finishes. I remember. She checks her weapons one final time, makes sure the marshal's badge is hidden beneath her shawl. Then Sarah Blackwood, widow and mother, steps out into the late morning sun. It's time to get a closer look at her husband's murderer, and the watch that might hold the key to bringing him down. In her mind, she can almost hear Thomas's voice. Sometimes, darling, the best way to spring a trap is to walk right into it, with your eyes wide open and your guns loaded. Kane won't see her coming, but by the time this day is done, he'll know exactly who she is, and why a mother's vengeance is more dangerous than any weapon in his arsenal. The town hall of Silver Creek stands proudly in the late morning sun, its wooden steps already filled with the territory's most prominent citizens. Inside, Victor Kane adjusts his silk tie and checks Thomas Blackwood's pocket watch for the dozenth time. Everything is proceeding according to plan, except for one detail. The Viper hasn't reported in. Sarah watches from across the street, now dressed as befits a widow of means, her dark dress concealing both her weapons and Thomas's marshal's badge. The morning's encounter at the barber shop had yielded its prize. One glimpse of Thomas's watch had been enough to confirm her suspicions. The secret compartment was still unopened, its contents undiscovered by Kane. Positions, she whispers, to Luke, who stands beside her pretending to read a newspaper. Michael's in the church tower with his rifle. Martinez and his boys have evacuated everyone who's not part of the plan. The Zhang family has James safely away. He pauses. Are you sure about this? Sarah's hand touches her bodice, where the evidence from Thomas's watch now rests alongside the Viper's most damning documents. Kane's got 36 armed men in town, plus whatever backup he's arranged. Standing against that kind of force requires more than just guns. It requires truth, Luke finishes, understanding. Inside the town hall, Kane takes his place at the podium, surveying the gathering crowd with practiced benevolence. The territory's wealthy and powerful fill the front rows. Ranchers, merchants, bankers, all of them are eager to hear about this special investment opportunity. Behind them sit Kane's men, strategically placed to control the room. Their guns aren't visible, but Sarah knows they're there, just as she knows about the explosives planted beneath the building, ready to eliminate all opposition if Kane's persuasion fails. What Kane doesn't know is that Michael has already disarmed those explosives, or that every person in this room has received copies of the Viper's records, or that a dozen trusted cowboys, friends of the Winters brothers, are positioned to counter Kane's gunmen. Sarah takes her seat near the back, exchanging subtle nods with her allies. The final act of this drama is about to begin. Kane clears his throat, tapping Thomas's watch for attention. Friends, neighbors, distinguished guests, we gather at a crucial moment in our territory's history. As he launches into his practiced speech about progress and opportunity, Sarah studies his face. This is the man who ordered Thomas's slow death, who planned to use children as hostages, who would sacrifice 1,000 families for his own ambition. The future, Kane continues, belongs to those with vision, those willing to seize destiny with both hands. Today, I offer you a chance to be part of that future. Like Thomas Blackwood was part of it. Sarah's voice carries clearly through the hall as she rises. Before you had him poisoned? Kane freezes, his hand going to the watch. I'm sorry, madam, I don't... Or like John Winters. Before your men shot him for discovering your real plans. Sarah begins walking forward, her voice growing stronger. How many more will you sacrifice for your vision, Mr. Kane? How many children will you take hostage when Project Phoenix begins? The room erupts in murmurs. Kane's men reach for their weapons, but the ranchers and cowboys are faster. Suddenly, the odds don't look so favorable for Kane's side. Who are you? Kane demands, though the growing fear in his eyes suggests he already knows. Sarah reaches the front of the hall, unpinning her veil. I'm Thomas Blackwood's widow, the mother of the child you plan to use as leverage, and I have something that belongs to my husband. She holds up the evidence from the watch's secret compartment, photographs and documents proving Kane's involvement in a dozen murders, including Thomas's assassination. Lies, Kane snarls, but the crowd's mood is turning. His investors are. Reading the copies of the Viper's ledger, seeing their names listed as future victims once their money was secured. The Viper kept excellent records, Sarah continues. Every murder, every bribe, every detail of Project Phoenix, your private army, your planned hostages, your staged accidents. She turns to face the crowd. How many of you have lost family members to mysterious illnesses? How many have been forced to sell land or businesses to Kane's shell companies? Kane's composure cracks. Killer, he screams to his men. But as they draw their weapons, rifles cock all around the room, Michael's cowboys revealing themselves. It's over, Kane, Sarah says quietly. Your pet snake is dead. Your secrets are exposed. All that's left is justice. Kane draws a derringer from his sleeve, his last desperate move. Justice. You stupid woman, I am justice in this territory. My money, my power, my vision. The derringer explodes in his hand as Sarah's first shot strikes it perfectly. Her second bullet takes him in the shoulder, spinning him away from the podium. That's for Thomas, she says, advancing with her Remington trained on his heart. A quick death, more mercy than you showed him. Kane coughs, blood staining his silk tie. Do you think this changes anything? I still have friends in high places, judges, senators. Not anymore. Sarah tosses the Viper's ledger onto his chest. Every telegram office in the territory is sending copies of this to newspapers as we speak. Your friends will be too busy saving themselves to help you. The sound of horses outside announces the arrival of the territorial marshal and his deputies, summoned by Sarah's allies hours ago. Kane's men, seeing their chances evaporating, begin dropping their weapons. You've lost everything, Sarah tells Kane as the marshals. Men take him into custody. Your empire, your power, even your trophy. She removes Thomas's watch from his pocket. This belongs to my son now, along with the truth about his father's courage. Later, as the sun sets over Silver Creek, Sarah stands at Thomas's grave, with James in her arms. Luke and Michael flank her, while Mrs. Peterson and the other townspeople who helped bring down Cain pay their respects. "You did it," Luke says softly. "Cain's going to hang. His conspirators are being rounded up, and Project Phoenix will never see daylight." Sarah traces Thomas's name on the headstone with her free hand. "We did it, all of us. Just like Thomas always said, justice isn't about one person with a gun. It's about good people standing together against evil." She pins Thomas's marshals badge to James's blanket, watching it glint in the fading light. "Your papa would be proud, little one. He died protecting what was right, and now you'll grow up in a world that's a little bit better because of his sacrifice." As the others drift away, Sarah stays a moment longer at the grave. "I kept my promise, Thomas," she whispers. "Our boy will know a different life, and somewhere, someday, when another Cain tries to buy power with blood, he'll know what side to choose." The setting sun paints the sky in shades of purple and gold, much like that morning when Sarah first arrived in Silver Creek. But now, instead of a widow seeking refuge, she stands as something more. A mother who protected her child, a wife who honored her husband's memory, and a woman who proved that justice wears many faces. Sometimes it wears a marshal's badge, sometimes it carries a wanted poster, and sometimes it comes dressed in widow's weeds, hiding deadly aim behind a mourning veil. As Sarah Blackwood walks away from her husband's grave, James sleeping peacefully in her arms, she knows their story isn't over. There will be other battles, other threats to face. But she's ready for them, just as she'll make sure James is ready when his time comes. Because Thomas was right about one last thing. The most dangerous hand isn't the one holding the fastest gun or the biggest bankroll. It's the one protecting what it loves. But the story of Silver Creek doesn't end with Cain's arrest. In the days that follow, the true scope of his conspiracy unfolds like a poisonous flower. Telegrams pour in from across the territory as more of his victims come forward. Mysterious deaths are reinvestigated. Hidden graves are discovered. The Viper's Ledger becomes a roadmap to decades of corruption and murder. Sarah takes a room at the Grand Hotel, the very suite where the Viper once plotted her death. From there, she helps the territorial marshals unravel Cain's web. Thomas's recovered watch proves crucial. Hidden inside are not just documents, but a tiny key that opens a safe deposit box in Denver. Inside, proof of Cain's earliest crimes, preserved by Thomas as insurance. "Your husband was a hell of a lawman," Marshal Wilson tells her one evening, poring over the evidence. He'd been building this case for years, piece by piece. Even dying, he made sure the truth would come out. Sarah watches James crawl on the hotel room floor, reaching for the marshal's badge that now hangs from his crib. Thomas used to say that justice is like a seed. It needs time to grow, and sometimes it has to be watered with blood. The trials begin in early autumn. Cain and his surviving conspirators face a parade of witnesses, widows, orphans, ruined businessmen. The Viper's detailed records leave no room for denial. One by one, Cain's bought judges and pocket politicians fall, their corruption exposed to daylight. Luke and Michael stay in Silver Creek, helping Sarah establish a new life. The town begins to heal, to grow straight again now that Cain's shadow no longer falls across it. Martinez's store flourishes. The Zhang family expands their laundry into a successful import business. Mrs. Peterson opens a school, ensuring the next generation will know the true story of how their town won its freedom. On the day of Cain's hanging, Sarah doesn't attend. Instead, she takes James to visit Thomas's grave, which now bears a new inscription. He died protecting the truth. She lived to see it triumph. "Your father was right about one more thing," she tells her son, who watches her with Thomas's eyes. "He said that sometimes the hardest victory isn't winning the fight. It's making sure the peace that follows is worth the cost." The winter brings changes to Silver Creek. The railroad still comes, but now it's run by honest men, elected by the people rather than chosen by money. The silver mine reopens under local ownership, its profits benefiting the town instead of filling a tyrant's coffers. Sarah receives offers to tell her story, from newspapers, from book publishers, even from a traveling theatre company. She declines them all. The truth of what happened lives in the territorial marshal's records, in the Viper's ledger, in Thomas's recovered documents. That's enough. One crisp December morning, Gabriel Hawthorne arrives from Santa Fe. The grizzled old lawman who trained both Sarah and Thomas surveys the town with approval. "You've done good work here, girl," he tells her, "but there are other Canes out there, other towns that need what you can do." Sarah bounces James on her knee, considering. She thinks of the skills she has, not just with guns, but with investigation, with strategy, with bringing truth to light. She thinks of other widows, other children at risk from powerful men's ambitions. "I made Thomas a promise," she says finally, "to give James a different life than ours." Hawthorne nods to where James plays with his wooden horse, the marshal's badge still pinned to his blanket. "Look at him, Sarah. Really look. He's got Thomas's sense of right, your fire for justice. Maybe the different life isn't about keeping him from the fight. It's about teaching him the right reasons to fight." That night, Sarah writes in her journal the story of Silver Creek, of Cain's fall, of how a widow's grief became justice's sword. Someday, James will read it and understand. The next morning brings news of another railroad baron trying to build his kingdom on broken lives 2 territories over. Sarah reads the telegram thoughtfully, then begins making preparations. James will be safe with Mrs. Peterson while she's gone. Luke and Michael are already packing their gear, ready to ride with her. Before leaving, she visits Thomas's grave one last time. The morning sun catches his marshal's badge, the original one, now mounted on the headstone. "You were right, my love," she whispers. "Some fights choose us, and sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is walk away when justice needs a hand." She mounts up, adjusting her black dress, still a widow's garment. But now it represents something more. Not just mourning, but memory. Not just loss, but legacy. As Sarah Blackwood rides out of Silver Creek, the town watches her go. They know she'll return. This is home now, the place where she helped justice take root. But they also know that somewhere out there, another Cain is rising. Another town needs saving. Another truth needs defending, and who better to do it than a woman who learned the hardest lesson of all? That love isn't just soft words and tender moments. Sometimes it's a gun in the dark, a badge in the light, and the courage to stand between innocence and evil. Sometimes love wears widow's weeds and carries a Remington. And sometimes justice is a mother's gift to her child. A world where right still matters, where truth still triumphs, and where even the most powerful men learn to fear a woman with nothing left to lose, but everything left to protect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.